Welcome. It is Verdict with Ted Cruz Weekend Review. Ben Ferguson with you, and these are the stories that you may have missed that we talked about this week. First up, Donald Trump has directed the military to go after drug cartels that have been designated as terrorist organizations. So what does that actually look like? We're going to give you all the details of exactly what the cartels are planning for. Also, if you are a Republican in a gerrymandered blue state, how do you fight back over what the Democrats have been doing for decades? All of this part of the conversation after the big fight in Texas over redistricting and the Democrats leaving the state. We'll have that explained for you as well. And finally, Google caught again interfering in the voting process. This time, conservative emails not making it into your inbox, while Democratic emails from candidates and organizations had no problem going to the top of your list. It's the Weekend Review, and it starts right now. It also goes back to the second part of the show, and it deals with the president making very big steps, bold steps here. And look at what he has decided to now do when it comes to dealing with drug cartels. He's made them some of them have been named terrorist organizations, and this was done deliberately on purpose by this president to be able to go after the drug cartels, which these cartels are clearly killing Americans each and every day with the drugs coming across the border and also the violence that comes across the border. And the president now has enough. He put out a tweet, and he's ordering now the U.S. military to destroy not only the drug cartels, but the New York Post is reporting as well that the president has apparently authorized military force against Latin American drug cartels classified as foreign terrorist organizations. The Pete Hegseth went on Laura Ingram's show tonight, was asked about it. He's like, look, we know a lot more about these cartels than they realize. We know a lot more about where they are, what they're doing, where they're moving. And the president said this is a top priority, and I'm working on it. And that was a pretty bold statement from the man in charge of the Pentagon.
Absolutely, yes. Here's what the New York Post reported, quote, President Trump has secretly authorized the military to use force against Latin American drug cartels classified as foreign terrorist organizations. The move is the most aggressive action Trump has taken yet against gangs trafficking drugs like fentanyl across the U.S.-Mexico border, the activities of which were previously the purview of federal law enforcement. The order, first reported Friday by the New York Times, gives U.S. forces official permission to engage cartels on land and sea. Quote, the president is determined to not just dismantle, but completely destroy Maduro's Cartel de los Soles and to obliterate their operations in the Western Hemisphere, a source close to the White House said. The State Department's list of foreign terrorist organizations involved in drug trafficking include Venezuela's Tren de Aragua and Cartel de los Soles, as well as El Salvador's rooted Mara Salvatrucha, known as MS-13. And that is incredibly consequential because it now sets up the stage. I would expect to see military action taking out the cartels that have been designated as terrorist organizations. That takes this to a whole new level. And just like what the president is doing in D.C., that has Democrats beside themselves because given a choice between siding with law-abiding American citizens or murderers and gang members, today's Democrats side with the murderers and gang members, and given a choice between siding with international gangs and drug cartels that are trafficking poison to our kids and murdering Americans or standing with American families, sadly, the Democrats choose to get on a plane and go down to El Salvador and have daiquiris with MS-13 human traffickers.
Well, let's talk about the narrative as well on this. Today I was watching and they were saying, well, this is the president sanctioning World War III. This is the president sanctioning an attack on Mexico, and that's going to start a war. I think those might be two of the most egregious and just absurd statements. The president, if we attack the cartels or terrorist organizations, that's not an attack on Mexico. That's not going to war with Mexico, even though the Democrats and those in the media are trying to explain it that way. I don't think the American people would see it that way either, especially with Americans dying on a daily basis.
I think that's right. And I'll point out also that there is a clear precedent for this. When George W. Bush was president, you had the nation of Colombia just racked by drug cartels, the Medellin cartel, the Cali cartel. And the result of these cartels is crime in Colombia was out of control. The murder rate was out of control. You had acts of terrorism that were attacking, and the cartels were murdering, were blowing up, were shooting police officers and judges and elected officials and mayors, and it was really in bad shape. And the people of Colombia elected President Uribe as the president of Colombia. And he asked President George W. Bush, will you help us? And Bush launched what was called Plan Colombia. Plan Colombia sent the military in and just decimated the cartels. Turns out our military is really good at killing the bad guys, and we did so. And it ended up turning Colombia around. It made a massive difference in the nation of Colombia. So our military knows how to do this. There's clear precedent. With some of these with some of these cartels, we will be asked in by the governments with open arms. In other instances, you may have elected officials and governments that resist America coming in. That becomes more complicated. The United States has acted against terrorists in foreign nations even when the sovereign government is less than thrilled about that. But it's more complicated if the government is asking us not to. But it is nonetheless how exactly the Trump administration navigates that will be an open question over the next 3 years. But I got to tell you this, if you're a Mexican drug lord, if you're a drug lord anywhere, but particularly in one of these gangs that has been designated a terrorist organization by the president, I would sleep with one eye open because, a Predator drone is really good at making things go boom in the night. And I think the terrorists and the drug cartels are all sleeping a lot less comfortable right now.
Now, if you want to hear the rest of this conversation, you can go back and listen to the full podcast from earlier this week. Now on to story number 2. Let me ask you this question. You hear these numbers. This is where I think Democrats screwed up nationwide when they were coming to the aid of the Democrats from from Texas. They're like, we're going to stand by you and we'll gerrymander even more if they take away seats from you in Texas, yada, yada, yada. Now people see this. We're talking about it. Everyone else in the political world is talking about it. There's a lot of Republicans are going to be angry. How do you fight back if you're in a state where, 30, 40%, right, or more than 40% in some of these states are voting Republican and they're getting zero representation in Congress? What do you do now? Is there a legal way to say this is gerrymandering?
Well, look, they are being shown to be complete hypocrites, and I want you now to listen to this clip from NBC where the governor of Illinois, Governor Pritzker, is called out on his utter hypocrisy. Give a listen.
Every major group that grades the fairness of congressional maps gives your state an F. Common Cause, a nonpartisan government watchdog, even says your map, and I'm going to quote, represents a nearly perfect model for everything that can go wrong with redistricting. And I guess the question is, you talk about preserving democracy. How do you preserve democracy if you're using the same tactics that you've criticized Texas Republicans for?
But as I say, what they're talking about is a distraction. The reality is that the violation of people's voting rights is what Texas is attempting to do. That's what's wrong with their efforts right now. And the fact that the president of the United States knows it and nevertheless is asking them to do it. That is what's wrong with what we're seeing right now. Democracy is at stake.
I love it. They always go back to democracy is at stake, Senator. Like, don't answer the question.
Ben,
democracy.
How do you know that a Democrat is lying?
They start talking about democracy at stake?
His lips are moving.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
It is utterly brazen. So let's go back to the numbers because the numbers matter. So Illinois, 54% of people in Illinois vote Democrat, and yet their map right now elects 82% of the congressional delegation is Democrat. Now, Texas right now today, Texas, 56% of the state in 2024 voted Republican. Our map, we have 38 seats in it, 24 Republicans, 14 Democrats. That means that right now in Texas, 54% of the Republicans elect 63% of the congressional delegation. So it's slightly more than the statewide percentage, but not nearly as egregious as the other states. Now, what Texas is doing is redrawing the districts so that 5 new Republicans are likely to be elected. So instead of breaking down 24-14, it is likely to break down 29-9. That means that we would go from 63% of the congressional delegation being Republican, we would go from that to 76%. Now, 76% is still lower than California, which is 83%. It is lower than Illinois, which is 82%. And it's obviously lower than Massachusetts, which is 100%.
Yeah.
And the irony, the loudest voices that are denouncing what Texas is doing are the governors of California, Illinois, and Massachusetts. 3 Democrat hypocrites that are all saying, you guys are drawing your maps not nearly as bad as we've drawn it, but how dare you get even close?
And by the way, you don't forget the New York governor, Hochul, got in on this as well. She was called out for it on Fox News Channel. Listen to this.
Summarized it. They said it was only 3 years ago that New York's Democratic legislature drew up a map so brazenly contemptuous of basic rules that govern a district's contiguousness that the state's Democrat-dominated Court of Appeals threw it out. The New York Times at the time called those maps comically contorted. That's their quote. So your state's highest court at the time, all the judges appointed by Democratic governors, they threw the maps out. So fair to say Democrats have done what they're now accusing Republicans of doing.
No, we followed the rules. We do it every 10 years. We base it on census.
But the court said you didn't follow the rules.
Well, we did follow the rules.
So the court was wrong?
Well, we followed the rules.
We followed the rules. No, you didn't. The court said you didn't. No, we followed the rules. No, the court said you didn't follow the rules. That's how bad they were in New York on that, Senator.
And understand, in New York, Democrats get 55%, 56% of the vote, and they get 73% of the congressional district. And by the way, the way they do that in New York is they break up Long Island. They break up Republican parts and try to elect Democrats there. The way they do it in California is they break up Southern California. They break up Orange County, and they try to break up Republican votes. The way they do it in Chicago is they break up the more conservative votes that are outside of Chicago. All of that's the strategy the Democrats do. And listen, the reason Texas is acting to do this is because it matters. Number one, nationally, if we have a Republican majority in the House. We have a very slim majority right now. Electing 5 new Republicans will make a difference, will significantly increase the chances of keeping a Republican majority in the 2026 election. But it also reflects the values of the voters of Texas. Texas is a red state. Texans want low taxes. We want low regulation. We want a secure border. We support law enforcement. We support keeping our families safe. We support the Constitution. We want free speech and religious liberty in the Second Amendment. Texans believe in fundamental liberty, fundamental values, and today's left-wing lunatic Democrat Party is directly contrary to the values of the people of Texas. And so what the legislature is doing is drawing a map that will elect a congressional delegation that reflects the values of the voters. That is not only not contrary to democracy, that is the essence of democracy, which is allowing the voters to actually elect representatives who share their values. And what the Democrats are mad about is that this map will allow the voters of Texas to elect representatives who share their values. In their view, anytime you hear a Democrat use the words assault on democracy, what they really mean is electing Republicans. It's just about power. It's why these same hypocrites did everything they could to remove Donald Trump from the ballot.
Yep.
Because nothing says defending democracy like taking your opponent off the ballot and stopping the pesky voters from voting for him. They don't believe in democracy. They believe in power, raw power, so they're perfectly comfortable with Massachusetts having 100% of its delegation being Democrats, but they're furious if a Republican state actually tries to have its delegation reflect the views of its voters. That is the beauty of democracy. And if you think I'm being too harsh, if you think I'm being too harsh and too judgmental of the Democrats, I want you to listen to my erstwhile opponent, Beto O'Rourke. Now, Beto, you recall, ran against me in 2018 for the Senate. He became a cause celeb. All of the Democrats, all of the media, their hearts went pitter-pat. And he was a phenom. And he came within a few points of beating me. He lost. And then he ran for president as a Democrat, and he lost. And then he ran for governor against Greg Abbott, and he lost. So at this point, he's 0 for 3. And he's kind of pissed off about it. And so when he's pissed off about it, he's really honest and candid. Give a listen to what Beto had to say.
We're not going to let him stop us. Are you with me on that? Ándale. It also means, as Mark was saying earlier, we don't await the punch thrown by these would-be fascists to land. We punch first, and we punch harder. We want California and New Jersey and Illinois and Maryland and every other state where the Democrats hold the governor's mansion, the assembly, and the state senate to redraw their congressional districts now, not wait for Texas to move first, to maximize Democratic Party advantage. Listen, you may say to yourself, well, those aren't the rules. There are no refs in this game. F the rules. We are going to win whatever it takes. We're going to take this to them in every way that we can.
You got to love Beto there. Family values guy, right? That's why he's such a just dynamic candidate.
But look, he is honest. This is today's Democrat Party. It is about power. Nothing else matters. Democracy doesn't matter. The will of the voters doesn't matter. It is they're imposing their radical left-wing values. And the reason they have to be so obsessed with power is their ideas are unpopular. If you put a referendum in front of the American people, you want open borders?
No,
overwhelming majority of Americans say no, we don't. You put a referendum in front of the American people. Hey, do you want to release murderers and rapists and child molesters? American people say no. Hey, do you want to confiscate everyone's guns? The American people say no. Hey, do you want boys competing in girls' sports? The American people say no. And so if you're a party whose entire platform is wildly unpopular, is on the 20 side of 80-20 issue after 80-20 issue after 80-20 issue, the only way you can implement your crazy ideology is through brute force and power. And Beto, I'll commend him for being honest. He's just interested, ironically, in being a fascist, in being a totalitarian. The language he uses, he doesn't want the voters to have a say. He wants to force his radical policies on them. That's what the Democrats are revealing to the whole country.
As before, if you want to hear the rest of this conversation on this topic, you can go back and download the podcast from earlier this week to hear the entire thing. I want to get back to the big story, number 3 of the week you may have missed. Senator, it's time we talk a little bit about Google. And it is another bombshell that's come out showing massive bias with Google, their search engines, also the emails that make it to your inbox, and those they decide purposely to send to spam. There's even shocking revelations now that sending a firm that sent the same email, the same exact wording, one with a link to a conservative group went to spam. But if it had a link to a hardcore lefty group, it went straight to the top of your inbox. How the hell are they getting away with this?
Well, unfortunately, it appears to be blatant bias. And listen, I have long believed that big tech censorship and bias poses the single greatest threat we have to free speech in America and the single greatest threat we have to free and fair elections in America. And big tech, the giant tech oligarchs, have been hardcore leftists, and they have abused their monopoly power to try to elect Democrats. And by far, the worst actor in this historically has been Google. Google openly censors conservative speech. It skews its search results to favor Democrats. In the 2016 election, the employer for the largest amount of campaign contributions to Hillary Clinton was Google. And so they are all in with the Democrats.
Hold on. Say that again so people really understand how biased they are. Say that one more time.
Okay, in 2016, think of all of the people that made campaign contributions to Donald Trump and to Hillary Clinton. So when you make a campaign contribution, you report on the FEC, you put your name, you put your address, you put your employer, and any contribution $200 and above gets reported. And so then they make reports, and you can see, all right, where does the most money come from? The number one source, not number two, not number three, number one source for campaign contributions, hard money contributions to Hillary Clinton was Google. Actually, technically it was Alphabet, which is Google's parent company, but that's Google. Wow. They were her number one donor. And by the way, there is a psychologist, Robert Epstein, who I've had testify in front of my committee, the Senate Commerce Committee, who did empirical research on Google and found that Google skewed search results and moved millions of votes from Donald Trump to Hillary Clinton. And by the way, Dr. Epstein was a liberal Democrat who voted for Hillary. He was still horrified at the results. Well, the latest report, I'm going to read from the New York Post, quote, Google caught flagging GOP fundraiser emails as suspicious, sending them directly to spam. Google is at it again. The GOP campaign donations could be a casualty. The search giant has been caught this summer flagging Republican fundraising emails as, quote, dangerous spam, keeping them from hitting Gmail users' inboxes, while leaving similar solicitations from Democrats untouched, a consulting firm warned. That's despite repeatedly sparking headlines and lawsuits in recent years over this allegedly partisan practice. This has been a pattern. It's been a problem. It's been going on for a long time. And it appears Google is doubling down and continuing to block Republican fundraising emails while green-lighting Democrat fundraising emails.
It really is incredible. And this just goes, I think, to the radicalness of the left, whether it's Google or we now have a guy that is apparently was in the Department of Justice who just decided, I got a Subway sandwich, I'm going to throw it at police officers and run away. And now we find out even the people that are still working the deep state are willing to do things like this. We've now found out who he is. He's lost his job and he's been arrested.
Well, listen, we've talked a lot on this podcast about how the Democrats have lost their ever-loving mind. They hate Donald Trump so much that they've just gone to crazy town. They've taken just about every 80-20 issue in America. They've decided to embrace the 20% side. So when it comes to immigration, they're for open borders. When it comes to sports, they want boys competing in girls' sports. When it comes to kids, they want children being sterilized and having gender mutilating surgeries. And when it comes to criminals, they're in favor of them. They're in favor of releasing murderers and rapists and Venezuelan gang members. And the left right now is losing their mind about D.C. and the fact that Donald Trump is exercising clear constitutional authority, clear statutory authority to ensure law and order in D.C. and to keep people safe. D.C. has the fourth highest murder rate in America. It has a higher murder rate than Bogota, Colombia. It has a higher murder rate than Mexico City. The murder rate in Washington, D.C. is 6 times the murder rate in New York. And yet, leftists are furious that Trump is saying we're going to stop murderers. And so what happened this week is you had a leftist on the streets who saw a federal law enforcement officer, and in this case, a Customs and Border Patrol agent. And this leftist began jumping up and down and screaming and cursing at him and calling him a fascist. And you got to, if you haven't seen the video, you got to picture this guy is jumping up and down. He's wearing a pink polo shirt and these incredibly tight shorts that, let me just say, it looks like a costume. And he's jumping up and down. He's behaving like a 5-year-old. And he's screaming at this federal law enforcement agent. And then he's holding in his hand a Subway sandwich. And he turns to walk away, and then he turns around and he just throws as hard as he can the Subway sandwich into the chest of the federal law enforcement officer. And then suddenly he realizes, oh, maybe that was a mistake, and he turns around and runs away. Well, federal law enforcement pursues him. They catch him, and they arrest him. Now, this is when the story changes. Under Joe Biden, nothing would have happened. Under Barack Obama, nothing would have happened. Well, under Donald Trump, He's being prosecuted. He's being prosecuted for a felony. It is assault to throw anything at someone. You don't have the right to throw something. And even if it is a sandwich, which looks, a sandwich is not a deadly item, but it is assault to throw it. And what Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, said, and what the U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro said is we're going to protect law enforcement. If you assault a law enforcement officer, you will be prosecuted. You will go to jail. And then this is where the case took a strange turn, that this pink polo-clad, jumping up and down nutcase, turns out he was actually an employee of the Department of Justice, a current employee. Now, Ben, I used to work at the DOJ. I've worked a lot of years in law enforcement. It is not complicated if you're an employee at the Department of Justice to learn to treat federal law enforcement agencies with respect. I got to say, I'm 54 years old. I've never had to restrain myself once from a desire to assault a federal law enforcement officer. And yet the left, they are so radicalized. They're so their worldview is so full of rage and anger that when they see a federal law enforcement officer there to stop murderers, there to stop crime, this DOJ employee entered into Sandwichgate. And I will say I did laugh out loud at Jeanine Pirro when she put out a video saying, well, he may have to stick that sandwich somewhere else instead, which it was not subtle what she was saying. As they might say in the South, stick it somewhere the sun don't shine.
Yeah, it's nice to see that in Washington, D.C., certainly the Trump administration, they're not messing around anymore. They're going after these criminals. And they're
Ben,
also...
your dad was a cop. I mean, how glad are you to see an administration that defends cops and says you can't assault them?
As always, thank you for listening to Verdict with Senator Ted Cruz. Ben Ferguson with you. Don't forget to download my podcast, and you can listen to my podcast every other day you're not listening to Verdict, or each day when you listen to Verdict afterwards. I'd love to have you as a listener to, again, the Ben Ferguson podcast, and we will see you back here on Monday morning.